Welcome to ICSR. Today we're talking to Palak Bedi, a compliance consultant with ICSR who specialises particularly in consumer duty.
So consumer duty came into effect in July 2023. How effectively do you think the FCA feel insurance firms have implemented it?
That's a good question, Ben. I think that firms are trying their best. I think that they're doing what they think is right. I think some firms are ahead of the curve than others. And I think that the FCA is concerned that people would do it once and never look at it again. And it's just something that they're building on with product governance, which is also here to stay. And they want firms to go further within their culture and embed the consumer duty. And it's not a one and done piece of work, which is what they reiterated in their webinar in December 2023. And I think that's where it's key for firms to keep going, to keep the momentum going, because there's also the Consumer Duty Annual Report that's going to be coming up, which is the next piece, and with that closed products as well. So they need to keep going. Even if they've completed their implementation plans, they need to do and see what's more, and that's the monitoring piece that they need to stay on top of.
You mentioned the FCA podcast, Palak. Are they available for people to watch somewhere?
Yes, they're available on the FCA website, and they're actually, I think it's on YouTube as well. It's available.
Palak, ICSR has been working with a number of firms on their consumer duty response. What would you say are the key lessons for firms so far?
I think there's lots that firms can take away from so much resource that FCA has provided around this. I think that even the FCA is aware that it's not something that everyone can accomplish just in one go, which is why they have phase 2 to consumer duty being added. I think the key lessons are around the spirit of consumer duty that the FCA would want firms to take on, which is the culture, embedding it into their processes, getting feedback not just externally from customers, which is also important, but actually also getting information from their staff who are dealing with the customers and actually have input that they can provide. And I think that there's a lot of answers available within firms that they just need to look internally, and they can find solutions, especially small firms who may not have the right funding. And that's where I think the second point is that having the relevant funding in place to make sure that consumer duty stays on the agenda is something that's at the forefront of all the firms, a strategic planning, because the FCA wants to see the performance of a business plus what they're doing to make sure that consumers, are being protected, are being provided with good outcomes, and being able to also identify poor outcomes. So those are the two main focuses, so around culture and to show their commitment by providing funding.
And that's what you mean by the spirit of the approach?
Yes.
So Palak, is there one key piece of advice you would share with firms based on your own experiences helping them implement consumer duty?
Yes, Ben. I think that it's super important that firms get the culture right. I think that is the theme that is coming out of consumer duty. Consumer duty is the added bonus to the treating customers fairly, and treating customers fairly comes from having the right culture. I think that it's important that the culture is top down and it's not from down to up. So firms need to be proactive and not do things when they go wrong, but actually be able to foresee if anything goes wrong. And the only way to do that is to have the right culture in place, to have the right oversight in place, and all of that needs to be fed into their board. And that's why that board report that's due in July 2024 is so key, because that's where the FCA has said that that's something they'd look to request from firms. And in that, you'd want to see the relevant MI, the relevant story, and that's really the firm's opportunity to actually go and showcase their culture. So for me, it's the culture.
Appointing the right person to the role of consumer duty champion is critical to ensuring a firm's boards and senior management make good outcomes for consumers central to their firm's culture, strategy and business objectives. Do you have any observations about who that person should be ideally?
Yes and no. The guidance states that ideally it should be an INED, so an independent non-executive director. However, firms vary in sizes, and consumer duty is about proportionality. So whilst ideally it should be an INED who sits at the board, not every firm structure will fit that bill. So it does need to be someone who's not a compliance person. It needs to be someone who is on the board, who can drive discussions and challenge the board. And it could be a CEO, it could be a marketing director, it could be many various people, but it shouldn't be the second line. I think that's important. And the reason for that is it's the first line who are the highest risk, and therefore that's where the culture piece again comes in, that it's not compliance driving this, it's compliance providing the necessary monitoring on it, risk providing their lens, and internal audit providing theirs. But the actual doing has to be first line, and therefore it needs to be for the first line to own that risk.
Palak, we've started to see the FCA take enforcement action, both in the insurance sector and with wider financial services firms. What lessons should firms take from the action taken by the FCA so far?
Well, the FCA are leading on this in the way that they want the firms to behave. They are looking at the MI, they're looking at management information such as claims and complaints. That is the focal point for them, and it has been for many years now because of the returns that every firm is required to make. If I was a senior manager at a firm, I'd be interested in seeing where my firm would fit on that spectrum. And if we are in an extreme or an outlier, essentially, because that is what the FCA will focus on, then what is being done about it within the firm? What visibility is there on the data? One of the key questions that I think, because consumer duty can be so overwhelming and big, is that people forget to ask the question that when you're making a change, when you're doing something, has it caused harm previously, and what are you doing to rectify it? Because those are the things that the FCA will be interested in. And this is where consumer duty implementation so far should reflect that you know what your business is doing, you know what the risks are, and as senior managers you're taking the appropriate approach to deal with it, and you're interested in making sure that good outcomes are being provided, but also poor outcomes are being avoided. So yes, those are the things. The MI is key, and that needs to be reflected again through the theme of the board report at the end of the day, at the end of July. But definitely start with claims and complaints, and that's not hard because you're submitting it to the FCA twice a year. And it's important for firms to be familiar with their data, because not being familiar with it will definitely not be an excuse. I think the only other thing I would add, Ben, to all the discussions that we have had today is the danger that I see firms could get themselves in. And it is MI related. And it's that don't collect information that you're not going to use. Because one of the first things that the FCA will see, especially in a board report or in the work that's being done, is what MI is being collected and what's being done about it. And I think that's the danger, that firms think that they can get all this data painfully and then they will go and not do much with it. And I think that if you have data, make sure there are thresholds in place that tell the senior managers, where the risks are, what they should be looking for. Revisit those thresholds and keep it simple, because FCA are looking at complaints and claims. They're looking at loss ratios. They want to see what benefit a product is providing and whether a product is paying out well or not. And those are data that businesses are very familiar with. Use it to your advantage. Don't recreate the wheel. Consumer duty was never meant for that. It was supposed to help businesses streamline their culture better so that customers are protected. And complicating it is going about it the wrong way. Play to your strengths.
Thank you very much, Palak.
Thank you for joining us today. If you have any questions about consumer duty or any other matter, please speak with your usual contact at ICSR.